you. Welcome to the Muslim Debate Initiative's discussion, Is Secularism a Rational Choice for Humanity? And before I go on, I just want to explain why we have a select and a choice number of people here tonight. Yesterday, Buckner on my left had a very big public debate with another Muslim speaker. This event today has not been advertised, so you've been personally invited to come along. It's a much more select group. It will be filmed as well, so that's the main reason why the disparity in numbers from yesterday and today's debates. So the discussion is called Is Secularism a Rational Choice for Humanity? Now, such a title comes to reflect the modern day debate on the level of religious involvement in the political spheres of life. It's taken for granted that secularism is a panacea for all the ills of the modern world, and whether that is true or not will not be discussed specifically in this debate. However, as a product of the jostling intellectual forces in the Western Enlightenment, it's now taken for granted that secularism as a political philosophy is the only reasonable and rational approach as a falsehood against the fanatical irrationalities of theism and its alleged violent tendencies. Now, with this in mind, we'd like to invite you all to consider the main proposition: is secularism rational? And harbour the spirit of the open-minded skeptic, that we should demand a reasonable explanation for everything one should believe. And today's debate will therefore be a blind faith-free zone. A blind faith-free zone. And my name is Paul Williams, and I'll be your host for today's event. And as I said, this event is hosted by the Muslim Debate Initiative, which is an intellectual, political, theological initiative formed by experienced Muslim researchers, debaters and speakers, aimed at encouraging inter-community debate, discussion and dialogue. MDI believes that only through frank and open discussion and debate can deeper understanding be gained, relationships between different communities be improved, and hopefully the breaking down of prejudice and false conceptions. It's with this in mind that we'd like to invite our speakers to present their cases. But first, let me introduce them to you. On my right is Abdullah, who is a former Christian who embraced Islam at a young age, or even younger age than he is now, and has studied Islam in depth ever since. Abdullah has had a long experience of working in the Muslim community. His activities include writing, talking extensively on Islamic revivalism, philosophy, sociology, and anthropology. Abdullah has delivered talks throughout the UK at community centres, universities, colleges, and made various appearances on TV programmes. He's engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, and Christians on a variety of topics. He is currently the director of the Muslim Debate Initiative, a public discussion forum, as you know, that promotes open dialogue and debate. And on my left is Dr. Ed Buckner, who currently works as an educational researcher and has acquired a PhD in educational leadership. He also serves as the director of the American Atheists group and has written, spoken and debated and appeared often in the media, both locally and internationally. He has been on Good Morning America, CBS Evening News, Fox News, and on nearly every local and media outlet in the Atlanta and Buffalo areas near where he lives. He's been quoted, sometimes at length, in newspapers all over America, and his website can be found at atheist.org. The event will proceed as follows. There will be a 25-minute each presentation, followed by 10-minute responses, followed by further 5-minute responses, and then you, the audience, have a 30-minute question and answer session, and then each speaker will sum up with a 5-minute summary at the end. I'd like to explain a bit about the rules this evening. These rules will be very lightly enforced, I don't expect any trouble, so the rules are as follows though. No one shall shout, jeer or disrupt the speakers while they are speaking. Anyone who wishes to make comments should save them for later, during the audience participation session. Applause is allowed at the end of each speaker's discussion. We would like to remind everyone that in accordance with the Islamic principles of Muslim Debate Initiative and the commonly understood principles of the etiquette of discussion, that we should respect everyone's right to hold opinions and express them, even the most unpalatable ones, as long as they are expressed sincerely and for intellectually serious purposes,
and not gratuitously and in a disrespectful fashion. And we hope you enjoy this evening and gain a deeper understanding into the ideological theist-secularist dialogue and debate. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to present our first speaker, who is Dr. Buckner.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I'm glad to know that all the important people are here by invitation. And it is an honor indeed to be discussing this issue with Abdullah al Andalusi. I'm undoubtedly not pronouncing it right, and I apologize for that. I want to, well, first of all, I want to point out that we've got all these pictures around and why people are happy. I'm happy that it's Father's Day and that my son has flown thousands of miles just to hear me speak at Conway Hall. And I'm very pleased and proud to be at Conway Hall and with such a distinction. Yeah, my son, Michael Buckner. He is not fond of public speaking, but he is more of a scholar and more intelligent and better writer than I am. So it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor. It really is. I'm going to start by not to instruct you, because I have a feeling you all know at least as much as I do about what secular means, but to explain clearly what I'm defending, what it means to me to have a secular government. And as I say, I have no doubt that this will not give you instruction, but just except as to what my own opinions and preferences and what it is I am defending. I am, as he said, the president of American Atheists. So obviously I'm an atheist and I don't have any beliefs in any gods, and I assume that that means I disagree with a fair number of you on something that's very, very important both to you and to me for different reasons. But this discussion today, in my opinion, is one that you should take my side even if you are devoutly religious. And I am not the kind of government that I would like to have, the kind of society that I would like to have, would be strictly neutral with regard to anybody's religious views. In practice, I realize that's not possible. It's never possible to be totally, strictly neutral on these matters. And I have no illusion that secular government is the panacea for all ills. There are many examples of secular governments that have done horrific things, including my own on occasion, and I'm not proud of that. But I do want to make it clear that when I say secular government, I don't mean pro-atheist government. I mean a government that is neutral with respect to religious belief. Now, governments are, of course, run by human beings, and human beings are almost never neutral with respect to religious belief. So this is an ideal, not in practice and actuality. I think, though, that holding that ideal and continuing to promote that ideal has great benefits for the culture, the society, and for religious people. There are, to get a little bit to the philosophical base of it, and I didn't bring my notes with me. I forgot them, but I've done this many times. I don't think I need the notes. I may very well wind up not speaking the full 25 minutes, and I've been promised that I'll be forgiven if I cut it short. Maybe. We'll have more time for the audience, and that will be more interesting and involving if, in fact, that's the case. But there are four principles, four ideas that if you will agree with me on all four of these, I am convinced I can persuade you of the case for secularism completely. The fourth of these four is probably the only one that we'll have any disagreement on, and exactly how it's defined and so forth may make a difference. The first is that human beings in this country, in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey, in Iran, in any country you can name, in fact, almost within any city or smaller subdivision you can name, do not agree with each other on religion. Now, I'm aware that in a country like Saudi Arabia, officially everybody is Muslim. But we all know that they don't all have the same ideas about even what constitutes Islam, and undoubtedly there are some people with no religion at all, no religious beliefs at all, but this is part of that society. They have no choice, or they think they do. So in any case, I think that you would agree that in every social group, every political group that you can imagine that's any bigger than, say, a family or a congregation of some sort, there are going to be differences about religion. I think, in other words, that differences about religion, important differences, not just minor things, but really important things, important to the people involved, as to what constitutes the proper way to behave, the right way to worship or not worship, believe or not believe, and so forth. That principle that we have disagreement, that's an important part of this. I suspect we will not have any disagreement about whether there's disagreement, but if you want to talk about that, we can talk about it. The second one, which I also suspect will not be controversial with you, and has hardly been controversial with any group I've ever addressed, is that human judgment, and I want to underline human judgment, is fallible. When it, even the Roman Catholics, and I suspect we don't have too many of those here today, but never know, maybe half of you are secret Roman Catholics. Even they hold that infallibility is limited to the Pope and only limited to certain very specific pronouncements of the Pope and that sort of thing. All the rest of us believe that voters and legislators and governors and council members and imams and preachers and bishops and what have you are fallible. They make mistakes, sometimes quite serious mistakes. Mistakes for themselves, for the people around them, and so forth. They make mistakes like dropping their phone and terrible things. It is ordinary and human and unremarkable that I would say to you that human beings are fallible when it comes to the things they make decisions about. That suggests, at least to me, that they can certainly be fallible about the decisions they make about religion. And I am applying this to my fellow atheists as well as to believers of all stripes. If in fact you allow for the possibility, I'm not asking you to conclude that God is fallible, only that human beings are fallible, that they can misinterpret what God wants them to do if there is a God, etc. So that second principle, again, I suspect is unremarkable. I suspect that we will have no serious disagreement about it. The third principle is that religious truth, metaphysical truth, cannot be reached by majority vote or by force. I'm not suggesting that it's not possible to change the religious preferences of a group over time through military force. Many's the country that's been invaded, taken over by a powerful force, Christian, Islamic, or whatever, where the children and grandchildren of the conquered become sincere believers in the conqueror's religious point of view. But I don't think you can actually, if I point a gun at any of you's head and ask you to change your opinion about religion, it is unlikely that you will change your opinion. You might very well say, okay, Ed, please don't shoot me, I'll become whatever it is I'm asking you to become. But being sincere and actually changing what you believe is most unlikely that that would happen as a result of that sort of force. Less obvious, at least to my American Christian friends and brethren, is that applies also to votes. I don't know how true that would be in the United Kingdom, that you'd have this sort of idea, but there are an awful lot of American Christians who actually think that we have a democracy in the U.S., that we have a majority vote, and that if a majority of people say they're Christian, that should be sufficient to allow us to dispose of our constitutional protections and have Ten Commandments posted in the courthouse and all of the other, some very silly, some more important violations of the secular state that we have. But I don't think that it will be very hard for me to convince any of you who do happen to disagree with me that majority votes and force is not going to change religion. I am quite sure that if we took a vote in this room, all 12,000 people, is that how many we have?
Yeah.
If we took a vote in this room and everybody but you said, oh, I think the correct religious point of view is, and it was something different from whatever you hold it to be, not only would that not change your mind, it probably wouldn't even carry any weight in changing your mind, nor should it. That doesn't make any sense. You have to adopt religious beliefs based on something more rational than that. So those three principles, I don't suspect there'll be any disagreement on. The fourth one, I don't know. This may be the heart of what we talk about today. And the fourth one is that individual religious liberty is important, that it is worth protecting, that it is worth preserving, that individual minority rights, that, regardless of whether you disagree with everybody else in your culture, you should have the right to believe and to express your beliefs and to act on them. The act part is far more limited than the other parts, but it should be as free as possible. If, in fact, you would accept all four of those principles, then it is hard to imagine on what grounds you would oppose a secular government, meaning a strictly, or as strictly as possible, neutral government, and more broadly, society. One of the things that gets mixed up in this and tangled up in this is the notion of tolerance. And tolerance has different definitions. And when I tell you that I'm opposed to tolerance, I want to carefully and quickly add what I mean by that. I'm very much in favor of tolerance in the sense of from one individual to another, being tolerant of your differences with me in terms of politics, religion, lifestyle, whatever. I'm in favor of tolerance in that sense. But when it comes to government and tolerance, historically, that has meant, and technically it's true even in the United Kingdom today, you have tolerance of all religions in the United Kingdom. But this is an official Christian nation, Church of England. And if, in fact, you look carefully at all of the legislation and pronouncements and so forth, this is a country where Muslims and atheists and Buddhists and others are allowed to have their beliefs permitted to, at the forbearance of the official body, the official church. It's gotten so, in practice, different from that I suspect that even Church of England authorities would agree that the Church of England doesn't have much authority in England anymore. But officially and technically it is that way. We have kind of the opposite situation in the United States, where we don't have any official church, but we do have a lot of churches that act like they are official churches, and we have officials who act as if they can speak for all of Christianity, and therefore they can't be opposed. And I actually think a majority of the citizens of the U.S. are not, in any orthodox sense, Christians like that, but a very strong percentage are cowed by and intimidated by the stigma that goes with atheism in the United States. So tolerance, if that means allowing somebody else to have their ways, something I'm very much opposed to. There's a much better principle to be held, and that is liberty, not tolerance. Thomas Paine, I don't know if you know, Moncure Conway, for whom this building was named, was a famous American abolitionist and freethinker and so forth, and he wrote a remarkable biography of Thomas Paine. So Thomas Paine and Jefferson and a Baptist, American Baptist preacher by the name of John Leland all wrote about the fact that they didn't want tolerance or toleration, as it was sometimes referred to, that instead they wanted liberty. They wanted, and this is what I think we should all want, they wanted a society where it was none of the government's business what they believed or didn't believe. It was none of the government's business whether it wasn't that the government could give them permission to be an atheist or a Baptist or a Muslim. That in fact, that's just beyond, it's a limitation on government. It's a statement that government is too weak and religious choice is too important to allow control of religion by government. In practice in the U.S., that's not always understood as well as it should be, and I regret that. I struggle hard for supporting church-state separation. And I do so with an eye not towards promoting atheism, but towards promoting religious liberty for all. Now, one more thing I'm going to say, and then I should see what my colleague has to say. I mentioned earlier that in practice, this strict neutrality is difficult. And in addition to that, I am fully aware, though I'm not, anybody who saw the debate last night is aware I'm not an expert on Islam. I think that would be a very safe statement, right? But I know a little bit about Islam, and I do know that it is a religion that says Islam is a part of everything in your life. You can't separate out part of your life and say, this part is what I'll let the government deal with, this part I'll let the church deal with. I am a Muslim 24/7. There are, of course, many similar ideas in other religions. Many Christians believe that it is not possible to put aside your Christianity. If you're a legislator, you're a Christian, whether you're sitting in the legislative hall or elsewhere. So in order to have, I'm saying to you that I know that in order to have a successful secular society, secular government of the sort that I am talking about, everybody has to give a little. You have to sacrifice something that may be impossible for you to be convinced that you should sacrifice. You have to sacrifice the right to control others, control yourself and your family and the other believers. Sharia law, which I'm certainly no expert, if Sharia law specifies that Muslims have to be allowed to make decisions within their judicial proceedings that are separate from or contrary to the civil proceedings, that can be a cause of real conflict. And I'm not trying to paper over that and pretend it's of no importance. I am saying that if you are to live in a successful multicultural society, multi-religious society, everyone, atheists and Christians and Muslims and everyone else, have to give a little for the sake of liberty, for the sake of individual religious and other kinds of individual rights. So that's all I have to say, but I hope we have lots of conversations, discussions. I know a great deal about American history related to church-state separation. So if you ask me about that or ask me about the treaty with Tripoli, I can go on for hours. But let's hear from my colleague.
Thank you very much. And now over to Abdullah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi at-tayyibin wa sahbihi as-salihin. Greetings and welcome to everyone at this interesting discussion that the MDI is having. I'd like to thank, firstly, Dr. Buckner, who honours us with coming and presenting a case for secularism. This is the work that he does in America, the work of his organisation. So he's very well placed to talk about this topic because he's had hands-on experience in dealing with this discussion. I'd also like to thank everyone here who decided not to have a lion on Sunday. And of course, we strategically chose a day where there was no interesting football match on. But then again, seeing how England's playing,
I probably need to apologize.
Even if that was, right? Yeah, even if England was, it would be perhaps an interesting game, unfortunately. But anyway, we're going to turn the audience against me now. I'm going to go quizzes. So why do I believe, that secularism is not a rational choice for humanity? Firstly, I wanted to talk about my motivations towards, I think, Western political philosophy and its political systems and worldviews. I don't really harbour any hatred for any particular, philosopher or political philosophy per se. Mainly because I understand that the people behind that philosophy, you could say, the human beings behind this philosophy, is because when reading the books of these philosophers, Adam Smith, John Locke, Mill, Bentham, and so on, as Immanuel Kant, and a whole host of others, I detected in their work it would appear a desire to better humanity, to help human beings, to not see these problems that have been plaguing, especially Western history, Dark Ages, and so on and so forth. And because of all these problems, all these wars that occurred, these people didn't want to see these problems always reoccurring, always deaths and wars. So they tried the best they could to construct a new model of organization of human societies to solve these problems. And I see that, and I can respect that, and I think we should all respect that. I think that's, it's virtuous to try to help better your society. So my criticism is not with them in any way of them having negative intentions, or you can't blame Adam Smith for what capitalism later became. It all came out with good intention. If you read their works, that's the case. And in a lot of these cases, some of them even almost presage what was going to be happening in the future. So a lot of the corruptions that could be happening in the future, such as obviously Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and others, talked about how the state can become tyrannical, how democracies will eventually become some kind of tyranny, which we have to, again, take up the weapon and fight against these new tyrannies and so on. And again, obviously capitalism, and so they all presages. They all kind of saw ahead, and I was really impressed with that they saw ahead of their time and realized that there's certain problems, certain propensities will happen even in the system that they had constructed that they thought that could actually help human beings. But I think the current context that's operating now in the kind of world, I think is best summarized by Professor Rajiv Bhargava. I think I mispronounced his name as well. So you're the only one.
Yeah, good to know.
Secularism seems to be under siege everywhere. The secular state is contested not only by politicians, civil society groups and clerics, it is even questioned by academics. So I'm not, this critique of secularism which I'm trying to bring today is not a uniquely Muslim critique. It is being critiqued by Western scholars, by social scientists, by academics, by philosophers, and virtually, if not every single one of the quotations I'm going to bring today, references, are from Western sources. It is not a monopoly of Muslims to critique secularism. There's been an issue of critiquing secularism for hundreds of years prior to this point. So what's the structure of my presentation? Well, the title is why is secularism, is secularism a rational choice for humanity? Now, I think we have to start off defining what is rationality, then what is secularism, followed by then assessing secularism according to the criteria that we've developed, and then demonstrating that secularism fails on all accounts by the criteria of what should constitute a rational belief, philosophy, and political philosophy for mankind. Just an important note, I will not, this is the debate on the rationality of secularism as a concept. And I'd like to approach this like secularism hasn't been implemented yet, and we were all deliberating on whether to implement this philosophy. That's how I like to approach it. So I'm not going to talk so much about the track record of secularism in the modern world. I will touch upon some areas because they're unavoidable, so to back up some of the arguments I bring, which might sound outlandish. I hope not. And as I said, I hope that this could be something that we can engage in better in the question and answer session with your contributions. Are most welcome. So, what is rationality? Very interesting, very kind of basic question to ask. A lot of people don't actually understand. If you use the word rational, they say we must be rational. Say, yeah, I agree, you must be rational in this or rational in that, make a rational choice. But when you ask them what is rationality, well, so a lot of people say, well, it's just things that make sense or reason. What is reason? Again, it's kind of difficult to explain that. So I'm going to bring a definition from the American Heritage Dictionary in honor of yourself. It is something which is consistent with or based on reason. The Kerneman English Multilingual Dictionary says something which is sensible, reasonable, logical, not influenced by emotions. In another dictionary explained proceeding or derived from reason or based on reasoning, a rational explanation. Now, another aspect is brought by Alan Bloom, who was an American philosopher, classicist and academic, who said that the earliest known explicit statement of the principle of contradiction, the premise of philosophy and the foundation of rational discourse. So, in this case, the topic that we're going to discuss has to not be contradictory in itself as well. This is one of the first premises of science to be rational. So, in this criteria, I've developed four criteria to assess secularism. One of them is secularism based on a rational grounding, i.e., is there justifying reason for its application? 2, does it possess a sound holistic worldview, which discusses the nature and explanation for existence or for human society which it's trying to organize? Does it address human nature and tendencies, or does it deliver on its promises? Again, this is analysing the subject of this application, human beings. Does it deliver on its promises? And obviously, is it consistent? So does it not fall foul of the rational law of contradiction? I think then we should start with the definition of secularism, just so I'm not strawmanning and so on. The National Secular Society, which is probably the British equivalent of the American Atheists. That's probably the British Humanist Association. I don't know where they stand, but I think the British Humanist Association is more the kind of theological side, and the National Secular Society is more the political side, it would seem. They define it as a separation of church and state, pure and simple. The American Heritage Dictionary, again I'll bring it again, is defined as either religious skepticism or indifference, or the view that religious considerations should be excluded from civil affairs or public education. Remember that religious considerations should be excluded from civil affairs or public education. Remember that point. I'm going to refer back to that later. Just out of interest, I brought up a definition of secular humanism from Webster's New World College Dictionary, which is secular humanism. Humanism that systematically opposes the introduction of religious ideas or standards into the functions of state, especially into public education. Now that's not secularism, that's secular humanism. But again, bear that in mind, I will be referring to that a little bit later. So, is secularism based upon a rational grounding? Well, if we consider the creed of secularism, what does it do? It separates human narratives from human lives. What does that mean? Essentially, if someone came up to you and said, the purpose, whatever your purpose in life is, whatever narrative or mechanism behind why the human life exists and what human life is driving towards, whatever this thing is, whatever the explanation is, has nothing to do or should be completely separate from your life. Does that make rational sense? And I'm not talking about just, theists like Christians or Jews or Muslims. I'm talking about it can be even to others like communists, for example. And I think the best way to explain it is, to explain the position that I'm trying to assert here is that the mechanism or purpose behind the existence of human lives should be a mandatory part of how we organize ourselves in order to fulfill the aims or direction of that purpose or mechanism, whether it's God or dialectical materialism. But whatever the case might be, whether you're a communist, who's an atheist of course, or a theist, is that to be consistent, you'll have to attach your conception of what the existence and why we are here or what human beings are about to their life. You can't separate that and say we should now create a partition in our brain and compartmentalize our lives into two different spheres. It's not rational. Now I understand where Ed Buckner's coming from. He's coming from that people debate on this issue, so I've got a pragmatic solution. Well, I'm going to deal with that in a second, but for the time being, it's not rational to someone present this solution to you. And of course, the secularists have a pejorative word they use against people that believe in that. They call political perfectionists, which is what John Rawls uses, or in some cases fundamentalists, radicals, and so on and so forth. And they can sometimes misapply that. I believe the communists were called atheist extremists during the 70s and 80s, in England especially. I don't know about America so much. But that was interesting. They were called atheist extremists. But to a communist, he doesn't view himself as an extremist. All he's doing is he has a belief, and he applies this belief in his life, and how he views the world consistently. It's not being extremist for the communist, he's just being consistent. Now, in terms of the next point of irrationality, I'd say, within secularism is it's epistemological fallacy. I think Ed Buckner was having a problem with saying that word epistemological yesterday, and so
I can say epistemological, okay, it's never mind.
The thing is that secularism is not based upon any rational narrative of its own to justify its own existence. What I mean by that, if you're a Christian, you believe God exists, and you believe that the New Testament is true, the Old Testament is true, and Jesus died for sins, and resurrection, so on, if you're a Trinitarian Christian specifically. And this narrative justifies why you should follow the teachings of Jesus and live a Christian life with Christian morals and ethics and so on. If you're a Jew, same thing, you believe about Moses and so on, and you believe according to the Mosaic law because it connects ultimately to God. Muslims, same with the Quran, Muhammad, And of course, if you're a communist, you believe that dialectical materialism, which is something to read up for you guys to read into. Basically, the world is an evolving matter, a material world of different forces, whereby two forces collide and produce new forces. And essentially, the difference between, for example, us and let's say this table is that we're a more evolved form of matter than this table. But essentially, it's all part of the material process, which is a mechanism. And because they believe in this mechanism, everything's about we're all evolving to higher states of material existence, that they constructed their entire ideology based on that premise. And that's a justifying premise for their ideology. That's why they negate individuality, they negate free will, because free will is non-material. It's all deterministic, and a whole host of things are all based upon applying their worldview into how they live their life, which I can respect. I disagree a bit, but I can respect it. Now, interesting, the political scientist or philosopher Hunter Baker, who's also American, he said that secularism emerged after being almost unthinkable for most of the history of mankind. And the thing about secularism is that it is attached to the political context which gave rise to that. And this brings me to my third rational contention with secularism. That it is just simply an attempted pragmatic solution based on a specific historical and regional context. It does not follow that it can be generalized for all human societies. Quick example. In the West, when they saw an establishment of religion, they made the assumption that this was stagnating their culture and prevented them from scientific advancement. In the Middle East, when they actually connected their viewpoint to the world and life and the universe, which and the belief in God, and obviously the Quran came down, so when they connected this belief to their life, to how they view life, and they structured society according to this, they saw a rapid advancement and change. So when a secularist comes to the Muslim world, for example, and says to us that religion is the cause of stagnation, we look back on our history and we don't see that. And there'll be a debate upcoming which will do a bit more about in a detail of that. But basically, the European experience cannot be generalized. It does not follow that it can be generalized to every civilization, must now be secularist because it worked for us. No, what worked, the problem that happened in the West was there was certain historical conditions and factors, with barbarian invasions, the decline of classical thought and thinking, a general lethargy in the populace for intellectual inquiry, people who usurped Christianity for their own personal secular interests, you could say. They wanted to gain power and use religion for that purpose. And so they started to clamp down on dissent, clamp down on criticism, and of course it led into a downward spiral. And in the West, because they had manifested all this into an institution which was called the church, because you could see the church visibly doing, oppressing people, persecuting people, that they came to the assumption that the church represents religion. So ergo, religion must be the cause of our decline, the cause of our stagnation. Hence, if we separate religion from life's affairs, then we'll progress. And how did they know what progression looked like? How do they know what advancement looked like? Do you know how? Because a backward person doesn't know he's backward or stagnant until he sees someone who's not stagnant and backward. And who did they see? It was the Muslims in Al Andalus. They saw them, the philosophers, and not just Muslims, there's also Christians and Jews living in Al Andalus. And they were philosophers, they were engineers, they were mathematicians, they were scientists, and so on. And they saw the difference between how they lived and how Al-Andalus society lived. And again, that will be discussed more in a future debate coming up. So again, secularism's justifying basis can't be proven. It's overgeneralized, and I think it's due to the traumatized nature of the European mindset with its history, which has caused it to invent this and then believe it's somehow universal. Some other points. Basically, he mentioned some other points regarding that, secularism brings the freedom to differ with other religions, or freedom to differ with other sects within religion. And in other secularists argued that in secularism there's no religious hypocrisy, so basically in a religious state, everyone would just outwardly show they are religious, but maybe they're not be true followers, true believers. But in a secular state, you can see who they are, and so you can see who is the sincere ones and who's not the sincere ones, and so on. It doesn't work so well in practice, but in this area, it again doesn't follow. You can have societies whereby they are dominated by a religion, but they are respect different religions and different sects. For example, the Ottoman millet system, historically speaking, where they had this multiculturalism, or al Andalusi, and so on. Again, that will be discussed in a debate. No religious hypocrisy, well, it's to a theist, it's irrelevant because God knows who is the person who is the hypocrite and who's not the hypocrite. So whether you can see them out in the public or not does not actually benefit or hinder your belief. In fact, it would hinder the nefarious workings of the hypocrites from undermining the system by being public with their corruption or public with their hypocrisy. Now, Professor Ian Hunter from the University of Queensland states, liberal government, together with the associated phenomena of political secularism, arose in response to particular historical circumstances which it remains tied. He goes on, the philosophical shallowness of liberal orders is a direct outcome of their historical emergence. And I'm going to explain, I already explained a whole bunch of, these are the core justifications for secularism doesn't exist. It was a pragmatic solution, and it met with some success, and hence they touted it as a universal solution for all human societies, which does not follow. But does it possess a holistic worldview? To check my time. That's it.
It's 18 minutes, you've got about 7 minutes.
Sure. Does secularism, how does it explain existence, and how can it justify certain concepts that human beings need to all our societies with? Well, let's go into this. My contention is secularism has an ontological fallacy, and in this ontological fallacy, it has no basis for the belief of equality of all human beings. There's no belief for it, and I explain this. You know, the philosopher Louis Poyman, was it Podgman? I don't know if it's a silent Y or whatever. Louis Poyman said that if we are to accept the empirical reality of people and their differences, there should be a presumption of inequality rather than that presumption of equality upon which so many political philosophers depend. And he read a wonderful book called Are Humans Equal? A Critique of Contemporary Egalitarianism. Have a read of it if you're finding it on Amazon. Hunter Baker, again who I previously referenced, said if we are equal, then it's almost surely in the sense that we are equal before God because we are virtually equal in no other way. Now, here's something interesting. In the United States Declaration of Independence, they say these truths we hold to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, it wasn't so self-evident to them at the time because they had slavery at that time. Obviously, not all men were created equal. Some men are only 1/4 of a man, or I don't know what the grading was for a slave at that time. These were not self-evident truths. And if you say something, if I come to you, let's say if you're an atheist, I come to you and go, it's self-evident what exists, you should believe. You say, wait, hold your horses, I want some proof here. Don't just tell me it's self-evident, give me proof. And it's the same thing, that you can't say these truths we hold to be self-evident. That's good for you, founders of America, but we need some justifications for this. How are we all equal? A theist would say that all our souls are equal, yes. Our souls before God are equal, although what we do based on our choice to do good and bad makes us unequal due to our doing good deeds or bad deeds, or being virtuous or not. But basically, secularism quite literally borrowed the Christian concept of equality and subsumed it into itself, and then claimed that it's self-evident truth. And all they were doing is imitating the social morals and virtues of that time, but again, secularism has no basis for equality. Second point, secularism has no basis for the existence of free will, and thus no reason to justify liberty or moral agency. Now what does this mean? Well, basically, the political philosopher John Keats, in his book Against Liberalism, lambasts liberals for having recourse to what he calls the liberal faith. He calls it a liberal faith, he uses it liberal dogma, he uses it. Because that humans have free will and therefore moral agency. But there is no proof to the liberals' claims. The very fundamental basis of liberalism, of which secularism some people would argue paved the way for in the Western Enlightenment, is that we should have liberty and freedom to choose. But And why is that? And they say, well, there's something intrinsic about us that just chooses things, and we can't suppress that thing inside us that chooses to do things. I say, but that thing that chooses to do things is what we call free will, which is the soul. If you don't believe in the metaphysical, then we're just all deterministic, like the communists would believe. At least the communists are consistent. They say there is no metaphysical, there's just the physical. So again, they borrowed that from Christianity and Judaism and Christianity again, and subsumed it into itself, and then just said it was self-evident. Because at the time, no one would argue against it, because everyone generally believed that. And it was a Christian society. The first secularists were generally Christian, weren't necessarily all atheists. And then the philosopher Charles Taylor says, the very idea of starting an argument whose foundation was the rights of the individual would have been strange and puzzling. Why do we begin to find it reasonable to start a political theory with an assertion of individual rights and give it primacy? The third basis, and this is an old chestnut with, I guess, theists and atheists. I don't know if you have that term old chestnut in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you do. That there's no authority in secularism for establishing morality. There's no authority for it. Dostoevsky said in one of the characters in one of his books, he was writing kind of this symbolism, and and one of his characters, of which was narrating Dostoevsky's understanding, said, "Without God, all things are permitted." And basically, without any kind of epistemology, any justifying basis for why why it should exist, why you should do things or not, or whatever, there is no criteria for human beings to be good or bad. There is no set of good and bad. What you're borrowing is, at the time, Christian understandings of good and bad. They borrowed it, and then over time, the atheists and others amongst them started to protest against certain morals they didn't believe because they were attached to Christianity, and they slowly started to get rid of them in the secular systems and societies that they lived in, until we reached the point we are today. But the initial society of the founding fathers of America and in Britain, or the initial secular society, was a Christian society with Christian morality enshrined in law. Homosexuality was forbidden in this country up until last century. And that was, but Britain was meant to be a secular, enlightened country for the last, 200-300 years and so on. So, this is the case. And John Locke, and Americans really respect John Locke as a philosopher and a thinker, and obviously he gave a lot of their ideas to base their society upon. In trying to envision a society which has morals, here's what he said about tolerance in his book, in his letter on Tolerance. Those are not to be tolerated who deny the being of God. Promises, covenants, and oaths, which are the bonds of human society, can have no hold upon an atheist. The taking away of God, though, but even in thought, dissolves all. Besides, also, those that by their atheism undermine and destroy all religion can have no pretense of religion, whereupon to challenge the privilege of toleration. Now, whether Ed Buckner agrees with John Locke or not in his area, this is John Locke's opinion. I would concur with this.
Time is up.
Sure. I'll finish the rest of it.
Did you follow mine? Let him answer.
Well, that's fine.
Doesn't matter. Either way.
We'll give him more time. We'll give him more time or something. Yeah. He's got that lengthy rebuttal prepared for me.
The discussion is more important. Go ahead, Tom.
Sure. And basically, that's in a nutshell the first two segments of my discussion on the irrationality of secularism. The third segment, which I will cover more in the rebuttals, and we can discuss this further, I'll just touch into, is the issue of how secularism addresses human nature and tendencies. Secularism is not neutral. It has values. These values, secularists will usually defend to the death. They will go to war for, they will fight for, they will not tolerate any threats within their society from. Secularism usually is dominated by the dominant faction of secularism or secular systems is the humanists, because humanists, they demand that evolution be taught in school, not creationism. If they view creationism to be taught in school, they will challenge it in the courts in America, which a lot of organizations do in America and so on. Debates on abortion, embryonic stem cell research, gay adoption, same-sex marriage, and sex education are all debates between those who are pro-secular, i.e. humanist, and those who are theists, although they might also be secular, but they believe that, well, this state should represent my values as much as your values, because secularism, if it's truly neutral, has no values. So we can insert the values which are dominant in that society, which in America should be Christian. Because secularism is arbitrary. You can pick any values you want and then call it a secular state, justifying that with democracy. And again, democracy and secularism clash because the will of the majority might override the secular ideology. So what do you pick? On that, there are problems, there are contradictions within this. Secularism will cause, people will stop fighting over religion, possibly, but they will fight over new things like nationalism. And they will fight each other within the countries. In Kenya, you had riots and people hacking each other. In Nigeria, in Rwanda, in Thailand, and again, this is just recent examples and so on. There are secular reasons, secular groupings, nationalist groups within the countries fighting each other. Human beings will always be fighting, it seems, and secularism has not changed or taken away that problem. It's only removed one restriction from fighting, and basically allowed nationalism, which groups human beings into artificial compartments or categories, whereby as a British person, I should focus and prioritize British interests over French interests, over American interests. Why? We're both human, we're both equal, right? So why am I going to prioritize my nationalism over his? Nationalism is purely arbitrary, and nationalism is the new religion of that secularism uses to bind society when religion is gone. Because as people talk about their countries, they say, my country, right or wrong, my country, is it my eternal country, whatever they sing their anthems or what have you, know what I'm saying? This is a religion. Your country is eternal. This nationalism doesn't have any objective existence, but it has all the accoutrements of a religion. It has rituals, it has symbology, it has its clerics, so to speak, those who are the representatives of the government, or those who are the charismatic champions of nationalism in their society.
It's football teams too.
Indeed, yeah. So nationalism is a new religion in secularism. Secularism hasn't taken away war, it hasn't taken away sectarian fighting. People just fight over other things and so on, if they weren't fighting those things in the first place. And of course, it is not based on anything which is substantial. And it has no rational justification for why it should exist, why its pragmatic solution should apply to all human societies, and of course, it has no basis to justify equality, morality, or free will. So in conclusion, I would say that secularism it is not even consistent because it should not even be using religious concerns in its belief system, in its political philosophy, yet it borrows Christian concepts to shore up its deficit in providing regulation for human societies in the terms of morality and free will and all this. So it's even not being consistent with what it's meant to be doing, not using religious convictions. And that is for those four reasons, that it does not possess a sound holistic worldview, it does not address human nature and tendencies and deliver on its promises, it was said, and it is not consistent, that I would argue today that secularism is not a rational choice for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. We're going to have 2 10-minute responses, and then we're going to have a short 2-minute break, or comfort break, I think the Americans call it. Is that right? Intermission, whatever I call it, after that, just give us a breather. So, Dr. Buckner, it's over to you for a 10-minute give or take response.
Yeah, I hope it's give or take, because I don't know how long. I have no idea how long I'm taking. Sorry about these things. I'm still suffering from jet lag even a few days later on. One tiny correction he gave, as he had asked me and I asked him to, gave the website of American Atheists. 2 corrections on that. It's not my website, it's American Atheists' website. It doesn't even have enough about me on there to satisfy me. But anyway, and second, the website is www.atheist, with an S on the end of it, .org. So there's more than one of us.
The 2 of you.
Yeah, well, at least 2, maybe even 3, where 2 or 3 are gathered. Many things to point out, and I think we have lots of discussing to do. I have a feeling it won't end today. I hope it does not end today. and let me just look at my notes and talk about some specifics here, and we'll get into broader things as we can. I honestly believe that my colleague and friend has overestimated the simplicity of America's founders in regard to secularism. The Declaration of Independence, first of all, that's not our governing charter. It is, of course, an important politically inspirational document for us, and it did have some steps towards founding a secular nation. But it was adopted as a war document against some evil country. I forget. That's right, Great Britain. Speaking of nationalism. In 1776, and it was not till 1787 that our Constitution was adopted. That Constitution was, in fact, pretty different from the Articles of Confederation which governed us before that. And the founders who put together the Constitution were at some pains to make their document different from any that had been gone forward in the world. Now, there's a lot of ignorance in America, and I don't want you to think that I'm here as a nationalist to defend America no matter what. Most Americans probably don't understand the Constitution. They haven't read it. It's disgusting. But the Constitution of the United States is perhaps the first important charter in the history of the world that does not invoke as an authority any God. The Declaration of Independence does refer to God, but it refers to nature's God, and it does refer to self-evident truths. And of course, you're right, if I just say it's self-evident that I've whipped you in this debate, that's probably not too much that will be too likely to convince anybody but me and my son. But self-evident is a way of trying to convey, we think this is self-evident, if you'll just look at it, maybe you will too. But I don't, partly because of the exact fact that you pointed out, at the time of the Declaration, and even at the time of the Constitution later, and for 50, 60 years thereafter, we certainly did not have all men created equal or treated as equal. In fact, of course, we didn't have over half the population included in that, aside from the slaves that you referred to. You got the fraction wrong on the slaves. It's 3/5.
3/5.
Terrible mistake. It's abhorrent to me and to any reasonable person that we have permitted slavery. It was abhorrent to Thomas Jefferson, but his economic worth was all tied up in the slaves that he and his wife owned, and it was a difficult thing to extricate from personally, but more importantly for the whole culture. But he hated slavery and he owned slaves. He was a contradictory person in many ways. And our documents are by no means pure, nor are they to suggest that secularism is pure. But when they say when Thomas Jefferson wrote and the body that agreed to the Declaration of Independence agreed to this notion that all men are created equal, they were referring to the natural rights. It is true, unfortunately true, that they were referring to the natural rights of white men who own property and that sort of thing, a very limited concept, but they had at least the wording that would allow for a much broader concept as interpreted by later folks. Thomas Jefferson was at some pains to write about the fact that the morality of atheists was no different from the morality of theists, and that he, in fact, knew atheists. He was not an atheist, but he knew atheists in the French Enlightenment, knew them to be moral people, and that could not come from love of God, because, in fact, they were atheists. And this is not something that he just, ignored. I have no doubt that you're quoting Locke correctly, but Jefferson did not take Locke whole. He took the parts of Locke that made sense to him in his self-evident ways. It is undoubtedly true that this emphasis on individuals and individual rights was unthinkable in most of human history. But that is what was most revolutionary about our Declaration of Independence and subsequently the government. Aside from the secularism, which is maybe the most important part of it, other than the individual rights. But this was revolutionary, but it was not a declaration that all men are equal in intelligence or height or power or these things, or talents or amount of property, but that they are, that it is outrageous for us to make judgments about which individuals have the power to affect themselves or their society based on their status. I'm maybe reading a bit much into it by using words like that, but it was a statement that it's deeper and more important to understand that it's arrogant to decide that an individual who has a certain last name or a certain religious belief, etc., should have more political power than another one. It's to say that in terms of natural rights as construed by the government, all men are created equal. And it is an important difference, and it is not the basis for trying to say that we should separate all human narratives. But it is, if you think about it, it's impossible to imagine that we will all agree any time in the next few millennia anyway on what the right human narrative is, whether it's communist or Muslim or Christian or something else. And the attempt for secularism is to find a way where we can live with and not have the conflicts that tear us apart within a society. We have not, I don't think there is such a pure thing as a pure secular or neutral society, but we certainly have not come close to attempting that yet. And I certainly agree that forces like nationalism and you know, we make jokes about football and the nationalism that goes with that, and I've had exchanges with a few Brits since I've been here, but yeah, I apologize for what the USA team allowed to happen and all that sort of thing. But nobody takes that seriously. At that level, nationalism is probably completely harmless. But when we have people saying, as indeed we do in the US, my country, right or wrong, that's a dangerous force, without doubt. It is in the ways that I find religious beliefs dangerous. That is very much dangerous in the same way. So I'm not trying to say that, in a very similar way at least. I'm not suggesting that secularism will solve all problems, or certainly not that it has solved all problems. I don't even think it's possible that it will in the future solve all problems, because it is not a comprehensive, it is not based on a specific narrative. It's based on the idea that different narratives are very important, cannot be resolved, and that we must resolve those conflicts within a culture, within a society, and maybe eventually within world society, not to eliminate the conflict, but to keep government, keep the overarching powers that go with it out of the conflict, so that you can resolve these things through rational reflection, through debates like this one, and other mechanisms. So it's not intended to be a panacea. It's not entirely fair to attack it because it's not successful as a panacea, as I see it, the kind of things that I'm talking about. There's no question that there are disputes and arguments over moral basis for our behavior, but there is plenty of reason to believe that you do not have to have a belief in God in order to have moral basis. We have criminal codes in most Western countries. Abdullah is certainly correct that I am ignorant of some parts of the world. I know that Turkey and Indonesia have, to some extent, some secular government within heavily Muslim countries. So it's not that it is impossible to have some manner of secularism within an Islamic country. But it is true that we must have some moral standards. We must have standards for how we treat each other. The criminal law is a part of that. It is by no means all of it, but if we say it's against the law to kill your neighbor just because you don't like him, and we'll put you in jail if you do it, we're trying to keep you from doing that, not necessarily to decide that we're right, but to control your behavior. And there is a strong cultural basis which does not have to be connected to a particular religion. The difference is not separate it out, keep any sort of human narrative separated from our society, but that we will say, all right, if you want to pass a criminal law, if you want to pass something that the entire government enforces against all of its citizens, that has to be justified not in terms of one of these narratives, not in terms, exclusively anyway, of a religion, but in broader terms, terms that cut across different narratives, not that ignore narratives. There is not anywhere in the Founding Fathers' activity anything to suggest that they were anti-Christian or anti-religion. You understand, I'm sure all of you understand, that the conflicts that we are talking about go back to before the time of the founding of the U.S. And in 1796, American ships were being attacked by pirates in the Mediterranean. And we concluded a very useless, it didn't get anywhere, treaty with the Dey and people of Tripoli, which is part of what is now known as Libya. And in that treaty, the only thing that I think is important about that treaty is that within the treaty, and it may not have even been a part of the treaty that the Islamic leaders of Tripoli were aware of. It may have been put in later, not be part of the original treaty. But the U.S. government, all of the U.S. senators who voted for that treaty, and John Adams, who by the time it got back to the U.S. was the president of the United States, all of them saw these words, and the words were, George Bush apparently never heard of this, as the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, and it goes on to reassure the Muslim peoples of Tripoli that will not be a reason for war. Now, I didn't say there won't be any war, but it won't be based on religion. And it was a clear declaration, not only that we were a secular nation, but that was important, that everyone should understand we're not going to make war, even though a majority of our citizens are Christian. We're not a Christian nation. The government is a secular nation. So it's not ultimately possible to separate, and I don't think the founding fathers of the U.S. intended to completely separate human narratives like that you find in Christianity from government. What they said is the narrative is important, but there is no way to objectively determine and peacefully determine what the ultimate narratives are. So we have to separate that from government. It's a de-emphasizing of the importance of government, not making government more important. It's saying that these decisions about which human narrative and how you're to live your life are more important than allowing the government to deal with it, not less. And that is misunderstood by many American Christians. I have no idea how much time I've talked about. All right.
You're over 10 minutes, so you want to...
Yeah, right.
Finish this.
I got it. Let me look and see if I have notes here. Okay, I certainly disagree that there is no basis for equality of all human beings unless it's before God. All you have to conclude, you do have to have some basis for that, of course. And you can't, the basis can't be, well, I look around and everybody is the same height, everybody has the same level of creativity, everybody has the same strength in their arms. No, it's baloney. Of course we're not equal in what we can do and what our capacities are. But you can say we're equal in terms of our worth as individuals, that these are natural rights, that this is something that we hold to be self-evident, that all of you human beings look around, the other human beings you see are human beings like you, accord them some rights and accord them the respect that you would expect for yourself. Is that an idea in some sense borrowed from Christianity? Perhaps so, but it is clearly different from leaving it with a Christian idea. It is a revolutionary and a different respect. I think I've touched on the main things I wanted to. We can ask each other questions and tease some of this out better, perhaps.
Good. Abdullah will give his 10-minute response, and then we'll have a short comfort break.
I think everyone who chose to sit at the back are happy that they're close to the snacks and goodies table in the front, so please get there first if you can. While it lasts. So, we should not separate ourselves from these snacks. We should live holistically.
See that we can agree on some important things here.
Okay, firstly, I think I want to respond to his rebuttal, and also I'm happy that he got extra 5 minutes. I got an extra 5 minutes for my presentation. That way it balances out. Equality. Yes. All right. I don't think atheists are immoral, and I don't think John Locke believes that atheists are immoral. I think that, I guess the point was that an atheist will learn morality the same way that most human beings generally learn morality, and that's basically through social imitation. You're, monkey see, monkey do, as they say. You're born in society, you get physically hurt if your parents obviously see you doing something bad, and there's pain association. There might be pleasure associations, and they'll give you a reward if you're doing something good, or various other means and styles there is to raise children. And so the child grows up with almost a kind of arbitrary likes and dislikes, as Hume remarked, the philosopher Hume said this. And morality is like tastes. And in some ways, a lot of human beings are brought up like this. But when the chips are down and you are very tempted to do something, you are extremely tempted to do something which is bad, the theist has an advantage. Also, an atheist will not fall back on their principles, but a theist has an advantage that they have an epistemological chain towards their morality. They can actually justify why they're going to forego cheating someone of their colleagues out of a promotion, for example, to get the promotion themselves, or competing with their best friend over a woman, for example, because they like that woman. So why can't I should have that woman, not my friend? Maybe I'm going to undermine him, or many other cases which occur on a day-to-day kind of level, and day-to-day temptations for a lot of us and so on. But in terms of equality, Plato, Greek philosopher, of which a lot of the Western thought is based upon Greek thinking, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. And Plato and Socrates arguably both said that human beings are basically, we are observably unequal in our power and our capacity. He remarked that human beings shouldn't, no one should be given a particular right or privilege to have more an effect on society than anybody else. But this is the case. If I'm rich and you're poor, for example, or you're just maybe average income, and I'm rich, I can affect much more society than you can. Rupert Murdoch's got much more free speech than any of us would even dream to have. And so, but you both got the same legal right to express it. That's all great, but he's got much more power than you. He's considerably more and unequal than you in terms of your ability to express yourself, to get your opinions heard. A lot of the movers and shakers, the people that politically lobby certain politicians, especially the big corporate lobbies in the USA, not referring to any Michael Moore films here, just saying, that they affect how political decisions are made because they have the political clout, because they can fund candidates, voting campaigns, election campaigns. And of course, in a very Machiavellian way, Western politics is predicated on the fact that politicians will be responsible because they want to be voted in. Why? Well, because they want power. So we will use their desire for power to account them. But having politicians that desire power in the first place, and then being controlled by those who have power, money, basically, is not a moral system or an equal system, and it's de facto human reality. So he did say that perhaps equality is based on Christianity, but let's just take it as it is, and that's fine. And that's all I've been arguing for today in my discussion, was that secularism just borrows from the previous milieu it emanated from, or was given birth to it, which was Christianity in various shades, and then just took arbitrary sets of morals from this religion and then applied it. And I'm okay with that. Islam also believes in the same equality like Judaism and Christianity does, but the point is it's not consistent with secularism, because you're not meant to have religious considerations established as part of state. Simple as. That's all I was saying. Not saying it's wrong, I'm saying that it's not rational. Individualism, again, I think that emanates from the Christian past. You know, we'll all be judged individually in front of God, and this kind of individualism spread that no societal organism or mechanism should control us to tell us to do pious acts because we'll all be judged individually in front of God. Again, that's also a religious concern which secularism just can't stop touching, can't stop going back to the storehouse of morality and virtue from its theistic past. You know, it's like one of those rebellious children that really hates his parents but can't get away from them. You know, that's a secularism. It really hates theists and their control of society and their ideas and their concepts, but it just can't get away from it. You know, it still has to go back and go, I hate you, mum, but I can have like 15 quid to go to that cinema. You know, that's secularism. Alright, he said, like, you know, we can't all agree on the same things, so let's be pragmatic. Well, firstly, we don't, for example, I might not, or a lot of theists in this audience, you know, Catholics or mostly Protestants or even some evangelicals, might disagree, for example, with, some kind of abortion, for example, or we do disagree with abortion, for example. But in this society, disagreeing with it, and we all commonly, Muslim, Christian and Jew, we can all come down and say we all disagree with it, we all stand in unison and say we all disagree with it because it's a commonality. Why is that disregarded? Why is that? Because the humanist faction, the dominant faction, humanists who are more materialistic in their viewpoint, just say that we don't care, basically. And secularism is as we dictate it should be. Right? So secularism is, that's why I quoted at the beginning of my talk, secular humanism. Because humanists are the dominant faction, intellectually speaking or philosophically speaking, in determining how the system runs. It's not, well, we all agree on something, so let's implement it. Because even if we do all agree, all the theists agree on something, and we're the majority, we still are sidelined and saying, well, no, we don't see any problem with it, so I'm sorry, we're the humanists. And to that, all I'll say is, I disagree with the humanist state. But, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't see why humanists should be in the ascendant. Why not the Christians be in the ascendant? In America, Christians are the majority. Why don't they be the ascendant dominant faction because they are the majority? You know, they should dictate the secularism, which I would, the values of equality and individualism and right on issues of abortion, I would agree with as a Muslim. So, you know, why don't they dictate? Because there's much more consensus with them. Why pick the humanists who are a minority in the United States? Why is that? Also, nationalism. Obviously, you know, nationalism is, you know, can be used for many bad things, and it does. It artificially breaks human beings down into artificial compartments or groups. And why did it come about, though? It came about because of secularism. Secularism took away the divine right of kings, which I agree with to some extent, and it took away religious authority for government, which I disagree with. I don't mind the kings being removed from their so-called divine, mandate to rule, and you mustn't criticize them, because even in our countries today, the Muslim world, for some reason the Muslims have imitated the medieval Christians, some factions of us, and I was saying the same thing about our kings as well. I was thinking, that's what the Christians are saying, the medieval Christians, what are you saying this? So even we have problems with that, but Islam also condemns. There is no divine right of kings. There's no divine right. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean now God has appointed you there. If you have to rule according to, you know, what is moral, what is just, what is the system which is mandated by God, otherwise you've lost your legitimacy to rule. And most, if not all Muslim rulers, unfortunately, are not ruling by what we view as the Sharia, and hence they don't have a legitimate right. But unfortunately, the Muslim world is pervaded by nationalism. Secularism is the dominant ruling ideology of the Muslim world. He said that we can't all agree on certain ideas, so maybe we should, you know, implement secularism. That's essentially like me saying the same thing, saying, okay, we don't all agree on morals, so let's separate morals from society. Let's detach morals and morality and virtue from society. If society can do whatever, let's detach it, because we don't all agree. You see, no, that's completely absurd. You see, but that's essentially what it's saying. And I suppose he's asking, well, then what is your solution then? What is the solution that I would come with? Well, I'm not here to discuss that so much, obviously it's mostly about secularism, but I would say that when I pointed to the Ottoman millet system, you had this, and this has also been concurred by authors like William E. Connolly, a political philosopher, who wrote a book, Why I'm Not a Secularist, and he said that We can all, as different interfaith groups and different groups that have different epistemological beliefs, we can all negotiate with each other how we can live. So if I live inside with a Christian, I won't enforce on the Christian to not eat pork or not drink alcohol because he believes that. It's okay to do that. You know, but at the same time, you should respect my religious morals and values. And this happened in a convivencia system of Al Andalus, when Muslims, Christians, Jews lived side by side. They had their own independent courts they could go to, and they were all shown respect. You weren't tolerated. You didn't have to discard your religion when you walked out your house and then just pretend to follow the ideas of the state. No, you were recognized as being a member of that faith, and you have recognized interests which are distinct, sometimes the same, sometimes not. And you were allowed to have that interest, and that interest was valid to be mentioned in the public square. This was the Islamic system, and I think it's a more ideal system of multiculturalism than the failed system that's happening in the West. And just to finish off, I don't know what my time is actually. I've just crossed, yeah. He said, I think the last 2 points was in the US treaty with the Bay of Tripoli. All right, he said that we don't fight you because we're Christian. We're not a Christian state. We're not going to fight you. Well, that's great. Unfortunately, the current American administration doesn't fight us because they're Christian. No, they fight us because they're secular or liberalist, and they want to do a war on Islam, a war to prevent us from having our Sharia system, and they demonize the Muslims who believe in this kind of understanding. And we're not turban fanatics like that behead people when they drop a crumb or something. We also have our intellect.
I'm very grateful for that.
Of course. There's a lot of crumbs have been dropped. Don't forget, I don't know who's been doing it. But you see, it's like we also have an enlightened system with our own values, our own free thought, you could say, traditions. And we want to have the chance to live by this, but the American politicians are saying that this is an anathema to secular, liberal values and ideas, and we mustn't tolerate this. We should, the sooner the world is democratic and liberal and secular like us, the more peaceful this world is, and they will use that to justify offensive, what they call preemptive defensive wars in the Muslim world. And that's the problem. So America might not fight us because it's Christian, because it's not a Christian state, as mentioned in its treaty, but it fights us for something else. Nationalism, materialist desire for oil, and so on. And again, I want to say, when I say America, I mean the American tendency of the American government, not the American people. There are wonderful Americans. Most Americans are wonderful, like the good doctor here, and and Muslims. Even when in Iran, when they were talking about death to America, they like to show that on the TV and Fox. Look what the Iranians are saying. We actually speak to an average Iranian, and he says, "Well, yeah, we hate the American government, but that's not the American people." So there's that. I'm not saying there's not any good people in the American government either, but the policy, the foreign policy, and the state policy seems to be overtaken by those who are more materialist, less moral bent. One could argue more secular bent to their perspective. And lastly, just to finish off, he said things must be justified by different narratives. Which he said this, that we should justify things by different narratives. By different narratives. Again, as I mentioned, the humanists don't do this. They will reject our narratives, even though we all a majority of us commonly agree as theists and so on. And democracy and secularism will clash with each other. They will clash. In America, for example, you have the Christian right and their desires to use their numbers to gain their agenda in American politics, and the minority of very staunch secularists who want to see a secular system fight against that, launch litigation against that, try to influence liberal media to fight against that. And this is you've got the American culture wars, which has currently happened. So this has not brought stability. It's not brought everyone all agreeing to disagree. There is big disagreements about politics. It's happening, and in certain countries it has led to violence. And I think the guy Eric Bülent in Turkey remarked that the reasons why they're having all these problems in Turkey is because of different interpretations of secularism and different factions fighting each other because of these different interpretations of secularism. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. Well, when we come back from our short break, it'll be over to you to make comments and ask questions. So you have a couple of minutes, folks. Thank you.
Are we all here? Right, well, as Father Frank put his hand up first, would you like to say something?
Two questions, one for Abdullah and one for Dr. Franklin. Abdullah, I think you were absolutely correct to point out how some secularist concepts and ideas arise out of the experience of the West in reaction to some the history of the church and so on. I think, in a sense, inevitably, after all, we are in England, like in the West, we are conducting this dialogue in English, it's a Western language, so in a way, it's almost a platitudinous fact. I'm not so sure I agree with you about the golden age of Al Andalus. I mean, I think there were shadows as well as lights in Al Andalus. Ibn Rushd, the great Islamic philosopher, had to go into exile because of his views at some stage. So, I mean, anyway, that's just side note. My point is that, and this I'm arguing, as it were, for argument's sake, because people will know me, you know, I'm not friends with secularists, quite the opposite. But once I can see, outside the experience of the West, some pragmatic case for some people wanted to uphold secularism in a way which Dr. Buckner mentioned, and the state should be neutral vis-à-vis religion. I mean, take the case of Pakistan. If you're an Ahmadiyya, also called Qadiani, you're not faring very well in Pakistan. You are denied the status of Muslim, which entails some liabilities in civil law. If you are in Iran, the Constitution of the Islamic Republic recognizes all castes, even the fire worshippers are recognized, they're supposed to be in Iranian, except for Baha'is. So my question is, would you not say that if you were a Qadiani in Pakistan or a Baha'i in Iran, so don't misunderstand me, I speak as someone who has actually met and embraced President Ahmadinejad. So I'm not, this is a purely academic argument. Would you not say there would be there an argument for a secularist view as defined by Dr. Buckner in a context which is not European, as is not Western? Question, Dr. Buckner.
So can we just do it one at a time? Because
Okay.
I was going to forget what we said initially. So,
All right, to answer that quickly. I think the thing with Al Andalus, it had periods of enlightenment due to the encroach of I think was it the military soldiers from the Franks, the Crusaders at that time. The Al Andalusian peoples who were poets, philosophers, engineers, and so on were very bad soldiers, very very bad soldiers. Their weapons were, jewelry encrusted and ornate design. They didn't know how to use it because they never used it. They didn't participate in violence and warfare. They were very lion culture, very civilized culture. So what they did, unfortunately, is in their desperation to get rid of these encroaching hordes of Franks under various banners of Crusades or what have you, they listed the help of North African Berber tribes who had a bit more of a puritanical understanding, and these people were maybe not as tolerant as the Andalusian Muslims. It wouldn't have occurred had it not been due to the encroaching Frank soldiers who were basically, they were from a very tough background, not so civilized regions and so. And so that's a particular historical context. But under normal business as usual, at Al-Andalus, there was this convivencia, this living together, this tolerance. But in terms of Pakistan and Iran, let me reiterate: Pakistan the government is as much intolerant as people like myself as they are with Qadianis. The Pakistani government is not an Islamic government. It's almost like it's a government which is secular, like secularism in the West, borrowed a few things from Islam and misapplied them, basically. And that's the problem. What I'd like to see is a holistic, enlightened, the true Islam, which was from 1,400 years as practiced by the Prophet Muhammad and his generation, to be implemented. There was this tolerance. When the Prophet Muhammad was, there was armies going through their region, and there was Christian monks down there. The Prophet Muhammad said, leave these monks alone. Leave them to their, dedications. So leave them. So this is the same kind of tolerance I'd like to see in Pakistan, in Iran, and all Muslim countries, whereby people who are Baha'is or Qadianis or Christians and Jews and so on, they can be tolerated, they can be allowed to exist, they can be given the full rights of Islam mandates. All human beings should be given food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education. These are all Islamic principles, which all human, it is general. The Prophet Muhammad said this, the son of Adam deserves all this. So we are all the sons of Adam, and hence we all deserve this. And this is the kind of tolerance, and not tolerance, acceptance, that I like to see under an Islamic multicultural system. Your question to Dr. Ed?
Sorry, the briefest of observation of what you just said. Fair enough, I'm not sure you can blame the Franks Crusaders, besides they are mostly Spaniards from Castile and from Spain itself, and also Spain, for the exile of Ibn Rushd. I'm not sure, I can't see a connection there. However, coming at Dr. Buckner, your argument seems to me falls foul of some of the points made by Abdullah, namely the question of metaphysical paucity, the metaphysical sort of hole at the heart of the secularist position as you made out. Seems to me that your position leads to relativism. I mean, Abdullah mentioned Plato. In one of Plato's dialogues, there is a sophist, someone who holds a man is the measure of all things. Man, a human, is the measure of all things. Now, if you hold that position, which was refuted by Socrates in Platonic dialogues, how can you then stand up to some of the nihilist and even immoralist positions which we have seen happening, exemplified in philosopher Nietzsche, is exemplified in some of the totalitarian regimes which have devastated Europe in the last century? You know, where is the metaphysical underpinning which secularism can offer, secularism defined, apart from a vague, pragmatic sort of assumption which does not meet the fact that there are all these narratives, which, by the way, are not literary constructs, but just, in fact, behind the narrative, actually human beings often fighting and this conflict. How does your position meet the challenge of this metaphysical gap, this lack of metaphysical underpinning? You know, whereas atheistic position can offer that eventual solid ground. At the end of the day, it leads you to say this is not allowed. Whereas I don't see how secularists can you?
Well, the problem for the theist as well as for the atheist is if there is no God, and we don't think there is any good reason to believe in the God, then should we make up a narrative and see if we can get everybody to agree on that narrative in this very deep sense you're talking about? Or should we instead say, well, you know, there is no God, there is no ultimate reality, there is no metaphysical, so we have to muddle along the best we can. We better be practical, we better understand that not everybody's going to see these things the same way. We have to come to some consensus as best we can about how to function and how to live. We adopt criminal laws and we say, you know, when you make this particular thing against the law or this tax required or whatever, you have to have a basis for it that is consistent with the Constitution or the Charter that we have. It has to be not in conflict so much with the major narratives that it can't be enforced or can't be accepted. The idea that secularism has failed because an evil thing like nationalism is interfering with our lives doesn't make any sense. I mean, no, I don't understand why secularists are accused of having to be responsible for everything or accused of stealing from their mamas if they use some idea from preceding human experience, Christian or whatever, as a part of the basis for how they function. And to believe that I have to come up with an absolute moral standard, a touchstone that covers everything for morality, or else I'm left with no way to function, is to say that, okay, we have to pretend there's a God whether there is one or not, because otherwise we'll all be bad children. It doesn't make any sense. If there isn't a God, then we have to construct it, deal with it as best we can. Secularism is a part of that. I happen personally to be strongly opposed to the kind of nationalism and the outrageous idea of, for example, invading a country on a preemptive strike without any sufficient grounds. I mean, that outraged me at the time, long before the war started. I was quite eager to have it stopped. And the fact that our system is not sufficient to have stopped that, to blame that on secularism, that doesn't follow. It doesn't make sense. So the answer is, I don't think there is this narrative
you
like
have
that.
a problem. You have a problem. There is a lack there on the physical foundation of your position, which makes you liable to the kind of critiques which are.
So if I don't think there is a metaphysical foundation available, I should make one up and con everybody into believing it.
But that's begs the question: if you don't have it, don't have.
No, I don't think there is one. And if that's a problem for humanity, then yes, it's a problem. But we have to deal with it as best we can.
Okay, all right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Adnan at the back, and then the gentleman in the red shirt there, and then a Christian there. So we have a Muslim, atheist, and a Christian spot. So Adnan, a balanced debate. Could you mention who you address your comments to?
I have two questions, very quick questions, directly to Ed. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for your presence. Very much fascinated. My question is that you stated in your statement that you promote or you support the concept of freedom rather than tolerance. Okay. My question is, how far can this freedom go? Is it freedom to kill, freedom to not tolerate people?
Yeah.
Because freedom can go, if it's relative, it can go anywhere. It cannot be controlled, especially when we look at it from the secular perspective. My second question is, when you use the word evil and good, you are presuming moral properties. And you stated in your debate yesterday that you do not believe in any objective morality.
That's right.
If that's the case, I feel that it is a big problem for you to use these words, evil and good, because you are actually assuming these properties, but while you have no objective source to refer to this regard.
Okay. It'll only take me 3 or 4 hours, so I'll get started. I may, in fact, need you to refresh my memory one of the 2 parts, because they're both good questions and both interesting. Let's start, if I can remember correctly, with this notion of freedom. You're absolutely right that there is no simple, straightforward way to draw the lines and to pretend, you can do a formulation like, well, your freedom ends where my nose begins. You can do anything you want that doesn't harm me or other people. That's a rough approximation that works in most cases, but certainly not at all. It would easily account for having a prohibition against one murder. It's not hard to justify building a criminal case that says you can't go around and kill your neighbor because you don't like him or whatever. It gets stickier when you get to different definitions of, self-defense, or what constitutes self-defense, when is it acceptable. You get idiotic notions that, we can have preemptive war because they might. And besides, they were behind 9/11 or something. I don't pretend that this idea that I'm presenting is something that is simple and straightforward, and if everybody will just agree with me, everything will be solved. Nothing of the sort is the case. The ideal should be to maximize individual liberty on the grounds that it's arrogant to believe that we know which individual is right, which one has the right important narrative, and so forth. We must, the bit about it being self-evident is to persuade everybody that it is self-evident, so that in fact it will be true and treated as true, and then we will have the advantages of having everyone accept equal rights and equal natural rights for every individual. That's an ideal which we're a long way from getting, and maybe we'll never get. The second part of your question, and then I'll let you ask some follow-up. I insist that you do not have a dichotomy, an even, clear choice, where either you have an absolute basis for morality grounded in God and in perpetual belief, perpetual standards, or you have no standards and no basis for morality at all. That's simply not the case. We have, every instance that we know anything about of God-given morality, permanent, absolute, turns out on inspection and looking at history to be variable. The standards change. They are disagreements within every community about important moral decisions. Those disagreements vary over time as well as over space. There is no reason to believe that human beings are capable of, if in fact there is a God, and if in fact this God has given us clear objective standards, we still have to interpret it through our subjective abilities. We have to, and it is available only by human perceptions. We have difficulty with this. I actually don't think the God exists. I don't think there are these objective standards. But even if they exist, human beings have to find them. And demonstrably, human beings are not capable of doing that in any kind of uniform way. So you have to construct standards for a society out of this uncertain thing. And you have to have some principles. And it does help a great deal if you have some strong moral consensus among a community that an individual has a right to speak freely, that an individual has a right to be treated as an equal, to be treated with respect, to hold different religious viewpoints, etc., etc. And those vary over time, and yeah, it's possible that 500 years from now, human culture will have changed so much that we will accept things that we think now are impossible to imagine that we would accept. If you look back, slavery was accepted by most of humankind, Muslim, Christian, and all others, a few hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago. And maybe in that context, I mean, you know, if I'm captured by my enemy, would I rather he kill me or enslave me? I'm incapable of knowing because I didn't have that opportunity. So possibly slavery under those circumstances was better than putting all your enemy to death. I don't know. If you look at the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, I don't know whether Jews would agree that this is a proper interpretation of the Old Testament. That Old Testament says outrageous things. It says that God, not just that human beings, but that God said, go and kill everyone in the community. Take the young virgins for yourself, but kill everything else. And it even talks about killing the cattle and the sheep and so forth. So there are justifications in the holy books that I am familiar with, the Quran is not one, for almost any kind of mischief and horror that you want to find. It depends on interpretation. Who does the interpretation? In every single case, human beings do the interpretation. So if you have secularism, what you're saying is not, we no longer have any conflicts, we no longer have any reason for wars, we no longer have any reason for imperial jerks like George W. Bush. No, it's not true. We are saying religion is to be removed from that equation.
I think
as much as possible.
Your problem seems to be with epistemology rather than ontology. Ontologically, you haven't raised any issues. You're talking about the interpretation, how we get to know things, how we interpret things, and that's to do with epistemology again. So your problem seems to be with epistemology, and which is what I will come back to tomorrow in tomorrow's debate.
Sure.
Coming back to the first point very quickly. So you do not believe in absolute freedom. A society has to be restricted, and you cannot kill your neighbor because you don't like.
I do not believe in absolute freedom.
Sure, great. This is exactly what the theistic societies want to do. They want to limit freedom so that that freedom can protect the society in long term.
There are many things with which I would agree with a theistic society. I don't, to me it is not, okay, we have to reject everything that has anything to do with theism, or we have to reject everything that has anything to do with atheism. It's a false dichotomy. There are many things that Muslims or Christians or other religions value that I also value. And if you want to say, well, the reason you value them is because you come from a background of, maybe so, I don't know. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean there's a God. It doesn't mean that I believe in a God. I'm an atheist and don't have any belief in any gods. But I do believe in human culture and fellowship with our human beings, with developing moral standards that we can agree on, and that one of those, the standards have to be complicated, not just who's the biggest and who's the strongest, and push the rest of them around.
Okay, thank you. Dylan would like a few minutes, 30 seconds, I think.
Yeah, very, very briefly. I just wanted to note here that I just picked up something in what he was saying. Obviously, he says that secularism, we don't need a metaphysical basis to make up a metaphysical basis. That's fine, but you have to construct a basis. And when you said that we should maximize individual liberty because it's arrogant for people to dictate orders and so on, but we should tell people it's self-evident. We should make them believe it, and then it will work. Well, I could say to you, believe in Jesus, and then you'll see the faith will come into your heart. Doesn't this sound similar? It's just
Sounds like Hamza last night.
Believe in this dogma, and you'll see the benefits. It sounds like almost selling washing powder, but still, this is the problem that I don't want. I'm a skeptical person. I'm naturally a skeptical individual myself, and I think a lot of us here are skeptical people. We should always approach things very critically. And for me, I'm not gonna just take it, see if my whites are white, and then buy into system or not. I want to criticize. I want it to be justified to me before I believe it. And so much so is the intellectual. Almost vacuousness of secularism, that you get the rise of these neocons, and the neocons, Straussian and so on, so that the people have lost kind of faith in popular ideology or any kind of narrative or even secularism. So we have to create a perpetual enemy just to get people to unite around the nationality and patriotism and be good citizens, just in order to have some kind of, to maintain order and progress as it was before. We have to invent an enemy. And this is why you see this, because the vacuousness, intellectual vacuousness of secularism is becoming more and more apparent by the day, not only intellectually, but also in the behaviors and morality of the next preceding generations, which again is a discussion for a different topic, but that's the point.
I know we can go back and forth forever here. I'm afraid that what my friend is doing is saying, that people like me are looking around for whipping boys or excuses, and that nationalism gives us that. And then he's saying that about secularism. Secularism does not say, as I see it, can't possibly say, that it'll solve all the problems, that it'll eliminate nationalism and the evils of nationalism, or that it'll eliminate other things. If I were claiming that it would do that, then you would be right to charge. But I think you, in fact, have over-interpreted and see secularism as the enemy and is inevitably related to these other things, and it's not well-founded belief on your part. I understand that secularism and Islam are different, and that they have a very different and important difference between them. So I'm not suggesting that you should accept secularism no matter what, but you shouldn't automatically see it as the reason for all problems, which it seems like you're coming close to doing. We have to go back and forth forever.
Yeah, exactly. The gentleman with the red jumper, if you wouldn't mind.
My name is Norman, and I am an atheist. It seems to me that Abdullah spent a lot of his time attacking the United States and its policy, and thought that by doing so he was attacking secularism. But you should remember that George Bush claimed to be a Christian and Tony Blair claimed to be a Christian, and they're the ones who started the war. They weren't, so that I don't think you can put the blame. Are you really saying it would help if Britain and US reaffirmed their Christian identity? This would somehow make things better. It wouldn't. Now, I don't think, going back to the main subject, I think that no one's really answered Ed's main original arguments for the secular state. And some people came in late and didn't hear them. But he started by saying, and that's clearly true, that in any group of people will differ. They differ about their religion, and they differ even in a group about their beliefs. This is obviously true in this room, in this country, and in every country. So that's the first reason for having a secular state, that people will continue to disagree. Secondly, he said that all people are fallible, except occasionally the Pope, allegedly, who decided certain things. The Virgin Mary went up to heaven, and that's got to be believed in by all Roman Catholics. So all people are fallible. Then the other point is, everyone has the right to propagate their point of view, including their religion. And the fourth point was, you can't decide religions by majority vote. And I was very distressed to hear you say in your main speech who talked about dictating things to other people. You can propagate your belief. You can't boss anyone else and make them adhere to your beliefs. So if you decide, for example, abortion is wrong, or some other particular fact about some particular belief, or something you don't want to eat, or anything at all, you're perfectly entitled to believe that and to practice that. What you can't do is force other people to do that. So the only thing is, you've got to have a state which is neutral, as Ed Buckner said. It's above any particular religion, and it defends the right, or should defend the right, of everyone to practice their particular religion. And don't forget, one thing that I liked about Obama when he came into office, one of the things he said is, there are all these religious people who believe their particular beliefs, say in America, the people who don't believe in abortion, for example. He said, if you want to put an argument in this secular state, and you want that argument to carry conviction, you can't base it on your religious beliefs. You've got to find reasons for it, which can be understood and appreciated by everyone of all religion. And if you can't do that, then it's not satisfactory. So that leads us to the final point. What is the basis of morality? It can't be a God. Let us suppose, as Ed says, okay, you've got a God. Let us suppose there was a revelation. Okay, you've got your revelation. Why should you necessarily obey that God and what he said? Is it because he's very powerful and very rich and can destroy you and send you to hell? These aren't really good moral reasons. So why on earth should you obey what the God said unless you personally have verified it yourself that it's something that you think is worthwhile? So ultimately, you can't pass the buck in morality, as religions like to do. It has to be the individual's assent to what it is that he's supposed to do.
I think perhaps he should come up here and I should go out there.
So you stay where you are.
I'm glad to have somebody summarize my opening.
You don't have to address all those 10 points. You can, I mean, we're not here all night, but
I'll be very brief. Firstly, I want to apologize to Ed Buckner if it sounded like I wasn't saying he's a neocon. From his ideas that I've heard from him, I highly doubt he's a neocon at all. I think he's
I'm not, I'll tell you.
diametrical opposite. I was merely saying that within America and in England, such as the infamous Douglas Murray, you get neocons rising up because of the vacuousness, filling up the vacuum left by secularism to give people something to be motivated about. And that's why I mentioned it. It had nothing to do with you and so on. In terms of secularism, nationalism, the reason why you say secularism will solve all the evils of nationalism, but secularism is the cause of nationalism. That's the point. It's like saying well, you shouldn't say petrol will solve all the evils of fire, but petrol, if you add to fire, it'll bring it about, or what have you, or if you say like a match will not cause solve all the evils of fire. Again, a match is causing the fire. Secularism generated nationalism because of each country, and when they took out the divine right of kings, they found a new narrative to justify the new concept of a nation state, not a kingdom anymore. So secularism caused nationalism to exist in the first place, and that's where it came up in the new era nation states and so on. Now on to what he said. Using America, I'm not using America to attack the example of secularism. In fact, most, if not 90% of what I've been saying today is very general principles. I've only brought in anecdotal elements from England or America. If I do bring in America, it's only because it's in honor of our guest here, the secularism of America is a little bit different than the secularism of England. You see, so if I tell him that, well, in here you have inciting to racial hatred is against the law, this is against freedom of speech. He would, and that this is a hypocrisy of freedom of speech, and then he would concur with me. Whereas in England, we say it's perfectly reasonable that you should limit people's speech to incite racial hatred. In America, you're allowed to do it. So there's a difference between England and American system. So I'm using more America because that's how he identifies with it. If I use England, he'll just say, "I agree with you." All right.
Job done. But anyway. You said, you mentioned his points, and thank you for that, because I really wanted to get onto that, and I spent my rebuttal responding to his response. But he mentioned the 4 principles, and it was that human beings do not agree. It's like, that's fine. So what do we have to do then? We have to have a system whereby if one people gain ascendancy, they can obviously control the framework of the society, but they give allowances to people who disagree with the main ruling group to dissent and in their own areas have their own system. That's a better idea.
Instead of having, right then, you must now all uniformly look the same, you must now wear Chairman Mao outfits and go out and not be individualistic or be different, you must all be uniform and conform to the humanistic viewpoint of the ruling faction. My only contention is that humanists are intolerant of theists and theists, and this is a big contention, and the culture wars in America is happening on this. For example, gay adoption, Catholic adoption agencies were compelled, and these were by the state, you must not discriminate against gay couples, otherwise you're not allowed to do your practice. And they said, well, we choose not to do our practice. Why not allow them to do it? If they want to do that, it's fine. I'm sure there's atheist adoption agencies that will allow homosexuals to have the adoption. But the Catholics, because they believe in that, why not allow them to do that? You're forcing them, you're compelling them now. It's because humanism, or this secular humanism, is dominating. It suppresses dissent and difference. And this is the problem. It's not the convivencia culture of Al Andalus. It's very different. And Christians, Jews, and Muslims who are not secular in our practice would concur. We feel this every day, that we're odd, or we are wrong people. We are the bad apples of society for daring to desire to see some of our moral programs, some of our religions, or the moral viewpoints of our religion implemented in that society or manifested in that society. You said human judgment, to answer the points that he said actually, you reiterated, he said human judgment is fallible. That's fine. So ergo, all human interpretation is not absolute and unquestionable. I concur. I see no problem with that. Yeah, I constantly, within our religions, Christians and theirs, Muslims within ours, Jews within theirs, we constantly, criticize and look to see if the interpretations of our ancestors, so to speak, in scholarship or what have you, not that I'm a scholar, were correct. Human word is nothing. Yeah, but what we believe God's word is everything. So unless it's explicit, any matter of human interpretation can be revised. I concur. I see no problem with that being atheistic. Why is only secularism meant to have a monopoly on that? Unfortunately, why not say that the people who came up with secularism are also fallible? Why not them? They're fallible. Maybe they got it wrong. We have to look at it. We have to look at that. This is why we're having this debate today. And the last point, the third point you mentioned, that religious truth cannot be reached by majority vote or coercion. I agree. My contention with Christians is that the Council of Nicaea was basically electing Jesus for God, and that's an election which I'm against. That is contentious. Christians will disagree with me. They will just say we're just reaffirming the orthodoxy or whatever. Okay, fine. I agree with that personally, but I also agree that no one can be forced and coerced into faith. The Quran says very clearly, from my religious tradition, that there is no compulsion in deen or faith or belief or whatever it is, because
until you become a Muslim.
Sorry?
Until you become a Muslim.
No.
Then you may not leave the religion.
Well, there's a thing. In liberal societies, everyone's free until you become a citizen. Then you become subject to the laws of that state, and there ain't no getting out of those laws. You ain't going to get out of tax, you ain't going to get out of government regulation, restriction, and prohibition. And when people, and to answer the last point, his last point is individual religious liberty, which to a very large extent, I completely concur with. Yeah, that we should have all the freedom to choose what belief we want to engage in. So I became a Muslim. I value the ability to choose, make that choice, and become a Muslim. But at the same time, there is certain hypocrisies within the Western system. For example, in the McCarthyite era, you did not have the freedom to choose to become a communist and be known as such as a communist. You would be persecuted. Currently in Britain now, there are witch persecution, so to speak, witch hunting, against what they call extremists and radicals, defined by the government. I don't know who gave them the ecumenical authority to define what is an extremist and what is a radical. I said communists were once called atheist extremists. I mean, who decides what's an extremist? And then why must they be given government money? Why must government money be put into programs to fight these people, persecute these people, and allow popular forces on the streets to go and riot, to ban mosques and ban these people from from expressing their faith. This is the problem. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to believe what we're going to believe and get on with our life and live side by side. But we're not allowed to do that because we're now viewed as threats to the state. So these are the problems that a secularist who can be a epistemologically legitimate secularist, staunch or 100% secularist, can say these people are a threat to our society. We must deal with these people. They are an ideological threat to our society. We should deal with these people. Just as in Nazi Germany, they were also secularist, but they said that, well, under German nationalism and their supremacist, extremist version, whatever extremism is, but I'll say it is extremism, they said that Jews were a threat to Germany. They weren't German, they're not real Germans. And this is the problem that I'm trying to highlight here, is that secularism doesn't fulfill properly all those 4 points to the extent that you'd like to think you did. And that's my point. I'm trying to highlight that you're not also consistent with the criteria that you developed. And I'm glad you brought up that question. Anyway.
So the Christian gentleman there, yes.
My question relates to a statement that you made that links up with your philosophy. You said that you explored the issue of human equality and you defined what you understood by human equality, and you stated that it's about worth, equal worth. I'm sure all of us would agree with that. My concern is that...
the triumph of secularism.
My concern is that if you remove the theistic explanations that support the equality of human beings in terms of equal worth, where does it actually, what moral foundation, what epistemological foundation is there for asserting that there is this thing called equal worth? It seems to me that it's possible philosophically to construct various arguments, which we won't look into now, at least I won't, to give that support. But actually, ultimately, it's an arbitrary thing. It depends on the individuals and the way they want to reason out a particular argument. There is no universal justification, moral justification, that's agreed by everyone from a secular point of view, because I understand you also reject all notions of objective morality. It seems to me that if we say, as you're asserting, that each human being has equal worth, that is a profoundly moral statement. And it also, to my mind, it's an absolute moral statement, because you're not saying most human beings are of equal worth. You're saying, if I understand you correctly, all human beings are of equal worth. All is equal, in my understanding, to an absolute. It's a universal statement of truth. It's attributing a value to something that covers the whole spectrum. So what I'm asking for is not for you to say agree with me or whatever the case may be. I'm suggesting that this is a deeply problematic point that you're making about equal worth when you actually reject all notions of universal morality. There's something there that needs to be reconciled, and I sense from what you've said it can't be reconciled.
It may be that ultimately it cannot be reconciled, but let us imagine that there is no God. I understand you don't agree, you're a Christian, you believe there is a God. Let's imagine there is no God, whatever you believe. Then we have a choice, and that choice is, do we construct the best we can a social basis for morality and make it work? And if we do, it seems to me that practically speaking, and based on our history and our experience as human beings, one of the best things we can do is to establish that this principle that we will agree on, get consensus on, build consensus for as widely as possible, that all individuals have worth, is worth doing for the sake of human culture and human progression, because we care about human beings. I mean, there's nobody in here who's not a human being. So to win this fight, I have to start by saying, okay, you're all human beings, you're all important, and I want you all to accept that everybody else is important and to respect that. And I have to extend that lovely, simplistic idea to the entire world, and then there'll be peace on earth and goodwill toward men, which would be lovely. I don't think there's a God, and I don't think that human beings are so simple that we can just put out an idea like that. announce that it's a self-evident truth and con everybody into believing it when they don't believe it. But if in fact there is no God, and in practice the values that we have had presented to us throughout all of human history by people who are saying they are doing it in the name of God, my holy sacred book says this, that has never worked. It doesn't have the practical success of working. We have had throughout human history all sorts of horrifying conflicts, horrifying dehumanizing of our fellow human beings, and destruction of people because they are witches. You mentioned that recently. And with plenty of justification in various sacred books for this inhumanity to man. Eliminating this as a basis doesn't really change anything. The truth is, we human beings, whether we're theists or not, have to deal with the fact that the moral standards we have are not objective, are not absolute. They vary. And somebody saying, oh, look, they don't vary. It says right here in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. It says right here in the Quran, you shall not do so and so. In practice, that's never stopped people from killing each other. It's never stopped people from engaging in the sort of thing. Abdullah said earlier that the theist has this thing to fall back on, this ultimate standard. We can see from history that that has not succeeded. We have had the Holocaust. We have had the Crusades. We have had all sorts of terrible, horrible things done to our fellow human beings. And it hasn't stopped. It's still going on. And it's being done in the name of God, in the name of Marxism, in the name of nationalism. I don't pretend that religion is the only problem in the world. And I don't pretend that religion is always a negative thing. I do think on balance it is more likely to be a negative thing than a positive thing in the long run. So I know I haven't fully answered your question because I don't think it's answerable by anyone, not by him or by me.
Right, okay. Can I respond to that?
Well, what I'm going to do now, the last question will be this gentleman here in the hat. So if you do want to respond, make it brief because we're running out of time. So.
Michael, put on your hat, please.
Good.
You mentioned the word consensus early on in your response. It seems to me that if we're all agreeing, if it was an atheistic world, let's all agree that humans have equal worth, that's effectively what you're saying. That is a pragmatic approach which it logically cancels out the idea that we have intrinsic moral worth. What you're saying is, let's agree we all have equal moral worth because it makes us all get on with each other. But intrinsically speaking, that moral worth, equal moral worth, doesn't exist in your template.
It doesn't exist in any supernatural way. There's nothing from outside of humanity to give us this idea. We have to accept this idea, develop this idea ourselves. And because we're human, we'll be less than perfect.
Can I just say just a point of information? One sentence.
Point of information, where that is.
Parliamentarian meeting, where's the sergeant?
Exactly, this is the Parliament. Is it to do with the far exit
Previous
or
question.
no?
The state doesn't have to judge people's moral worth if they come before a court. All it's saying is it may not take account of a person's religion in deciding whether he's guilty or innocent. That's all it means.
Thank you for that. The gentleman here in front of us.
First point I just wanted to mention, I think you read too much into secularism, because it's like you mentioned that secularism actually created nationalism. Well, England was England and France was France long before secularism actually came along on the scene. And they're distinct identities as nations. So secularism might have contributed to it, but it certainly didn't create that. The other thing is, secularism itself actually developed from a number of things that came even from within Islamic tradition. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessing be upon him, when he actually went to Medina, actually set up a constitution where he recognized that the Jews did not have to recognize him as a prophet of God, but as the head of state, which the tribes of Medina had invited him to be. And so in a sense, that could be seen as secular. It certainly was a precursor to many of the same things that came about within, I'm talking about pure secularism here, because a lot of your criticisms are forms of secularism as opposed to the pure points of secularism itself. The other thing is that you can also see this even in the Court of Valencia when it was actually prospering, and the Turkish system is the same thing. There's elements there which could be seen as secular. Certainly they weren't like theocracies, in the sense like you would see in the Ayatollah in Iran or something, or the Catholics when they were dominant. The other point I have is for the Honourable Doctor. It's, with your points about secularism, it's how do you respond to when secularism becomes such that forms of it actually persecute religion. It's like banning of hijabs, banning of crosses, and other kinds of religious things. I mean, I'd just like to hear, what you have to say about this.
I think secularism can get corrupted, and I think when it actually persecutes religion, the trouble is interpreting what counts as persecuting religion. But when it actually persecutes religion, then it has failed, and it is not a pure secularism or an appropriate secularism as I would define it. So I'm a very strong believer in religious liberty for people who have completely different religious ideas than each other or than me. When you get into the practical things, if you get into like in France, whether they ban the wearing of headscarves as they go to university, I would disagree with them. I think that's a mistake. When you get a thing about whether a woman can wear the burqa and not be visible, if she's driving or if she has in a public arrangement, then I have a problem with allowing that because it affects other people and not just her or her culture or her family. So there are going to be differences in interpretation. Secularism doesn't eliminate the fact that human beings have fallibility in their judgment and disagree with each other, and it doesn't eliminate nationalism and these other things. But I would agree with the premise that secularism has failed when it persecutes religion. We get the definitions of what counts as persecution, we're going to have trouble, of course. But I agree with the basic idea.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things not a great example was the the banning of niqab in France. What was the reason why they wanted to ban niqab in France? If you looked at actually the statements of French politicians, I read a couple of articles on this. They mentioned that the burqa itself is underpinned by this kind of radicalism, Islamic extremism, which is a threat to the French ideals. And it's like, where's the tolerance? French ideals. Where's France's tolerance? And they would say, oh, but you have to follow our culture. Oh, really? Who said I have to follow the culture? Is there some divine or absolute basis upon which says that French culture must be followed? What is French culture? Who decides? So the problem, the issues which you raised, which I agree. When you said that, and I corrected nationalism, but England was always England and France was always France. The names of the regions or the kingdoms, But what changed was it stopped being a kingdom and started being a nation state. You see, and that's what I call nationalism. The birth of nation states. That was the nationalism. That is actually nationalism coming about. That's when they said it stopped being kingdoms, started being national. Although in theory, the UK is still a kingdom in theory. But anyhow, then you said something interesting with the Prophet Muhammad, whether the form of secularism. I'd like to find any secularist philosopher anywhere, any non-Muslim secularist philosopher anywhere that would say that implementing rules based on divine law is secularism or a form of secularism. I'd like to find that. Although judging by secularism borrows from Christianity, maybe I could. but that's the thing, though. I mean, just because the Prophet Muhammad allowed people of different other faiths and accepted people of other faiths.
Have you read the Constitution of the Deen?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
It's not really, worded in the way that you indicate.
I haven't remarked on the wording. I've just said that he did not. It wasn't that he said, right then, well, we'll have just my religious beliefs and then we'll have a neutral system. If you read the Constitution of Medina, it says, all matters, if any disputes arise, all matters are to be referred to who? Allah and His Apostle. Thank you. In the Constitution of Medina, secularist constitution, is that secularist?
I'm not saying it's exactly secularist. I'm saying that.
It's not even. If you say it's a form of secularism, then the word secularism itself will have no meaning then.
Because there's a distinct separation.
Just
distinct separation between his role as prophet and his role as head of state. And I know it's not true secularism in the sense that we understand it now, but you can certainly see it as a kind of precursor with similar principles.
Well, not really, because I mean, in the deuteronomical system, in the Old Testament, how the Jews meant to create their state, and how it's organized is you have the king, and you have the jurisprudence, the courts and the Sanhedrin and so on. Yeah, they judge according to the law of Moses. The law of Moses is above all, and the king just executes it. So they are the ones who judge and extrapolate new laws from the law of Moses. And the king, he executes this law. He has no choice in the matter. Is that secularist? If that's the case, in every kingdom or law system from the dawn of time is secularist. According to that definition, that's such a general definition, but it's not the case. Just because there's a separation of powers doesn't mean that it's a separation of religion from secular, worldly matters. That's a confusion I think you're finding in analysing the situation. It's very distinct, and the base of the state was divinely revealed laws as understood by the people who implemented them. Just a separation of, you have the leader, and then you have the jurisprudence. And that's always been in the Mosaic system and in the Islamic system.
Okay. Thanks, Abdullah. Well, thank you for your questions and comments. I'm sorry we've run out of time. I'd now like to invite both our speakers to give concluding remarks to this evening's talk. Both speakers have 5 minutes, and Ed will go first, I think.
All right. If this conversation has convinced you that it's not simple, then that's good. It's not simple. I understand that it is not. But if this conversation has convinced you that there is a good alternative to secular approaches, then I don't see how. I really have not heard an alternative to a secular approach. Secular approach has all manner of problems. It does not guarantee, it's not a panacea. It won't eliminate nationalism or the other bases for war that we often find. But what's the alternative? Are you going to accept that we will eliminate the rights of individuals and insist that each individual accept the consensus of a religious point of view, and that, remember, if you accept Sharia law or Jewish law or Catholic law or any of these others, you are accepting what somebody else says is what God says. You're not accepting a direct thing from God. If I mentioned in the debate last night, that I read in this fictional story just yesterday afternoon, if God revealed himself and all of his characteristics and commandments to all of humanity tomorrow, necessarily more than half of the world's population would be disappointed, because there are quite severe and important differences in concepts and understandings of what God is like. So even if there is a God, we don't agree in very crucial and important ways. We don't agree about what he's like or what he says or what he wants. So the alternative to secularism is to say, okay, we'll have a nation or a society where we will keep only the Jews or the Muslims or the whatevers and throw the rest out or deprive them of their rights and their equality before the state. It's a serious misinterpretation to say that this idea of secularism demands that we act as if everyone is equal in all important respects. There are problems. I'm definitely not rich enough to want the rich to have all the power they have. I like all sorts of changes in American society, secular though it is. So I'm not suggesting that if it's secular, that's all it has to be. Of course, we've got lots of reasons for disagreeing and lots of need to resolve our dispute. And would it be better if, in fact, we could have an objective and absolute standard? I don't know. There is no such thing, so it's hard to know whether it would be better. And I know that those who say that there is such a thing don't agree with each other. They don't have an absolute standard. So it leaves us with this, you criticize secularism for having problems that are in fact are real problems in human society, but you have to come up with an alternative. You have to say, okay, we want to have in England eliminate the king, and we've done our best to participate in that part of it. We did have a little revolution that undercut the king quite severely. And by the way, the Bibles that we had laying about all said in Romans, Michael, what's the verse? What?
Chapter 13.
Romans chapter 13. That a good Christian has to obey the constituted authorities, has to not rebel against the king. That was not a trivial disagreement when we decided we didn't go along with that. So, you know, a secular society is certainly not perfectly rational. It's not perfectly practical. It's not perfectly politically successful. It is similar to what Winston Churchill said about democracy. You know, it's a terrible system. It's just better than anything else we can think of.
Thank you, Ed. Abdullah, you have 5 minutes thereabouts.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ed for a very great discussion we've had. I think we've done engaged in a lot of topics, and I think there's a lot for us to walk away from. I've certainly learned something. I hope you certainly learned something from this, and that was the point of today's evening, is for us to gain more understanding about these topics. But to go into the crux, I mean, basically, as I said before, I don't hold it or harbour any hatred or resentment to the political philosophers who came up with secularism or liberalism or even communism and so on. I read their books, I see what they're saying, and I detect in them a desire for good, a desire to try to improve the societies that they were trying to solve, that they were seeing there were problems, amongst. But just because they were desired good doesn't mean now I should just accept their ideas. You know, I can say you desire good, that's great, good intentions, but you know what? The bad solution, though. You know, you get points for effort. Now that's essentially my approach for this. So I don't harbour any resentment. None of us here should harbour any resentment or hatred for different ideas. We should view all the people who came up with these ideas. We should instead learn to appreciate the good intentions behind these ideas, with the possible exception of obviously Nazism and all that. Maybe there are exceptions. Anyway,
there are differences.
Degrees. There we go. Just a few points. Basically, I think to surmise, what you're saying, his point is, if you accept living under a state not based on your system, then that means you're accepting the beliefs of that system. I say, not at all. The Prophet Muhammad, when a Jew came up to him committed a crime, he asked for someone to bring the Torah to say, now what is the punishment for this crime that this Jew has done, and then he executed the punishment in the Torah for which the Jew believes in. Now, I would love it to live under a Christian state, where I am accepted as a Muslim, where my values and my beliefs are accepted. The state might not believe in it. It might be based on the teachings of the New Testament and what have you, which I don't hold to be authoritative. But if they recognize that I have a right to exist, that I have a human right, which all human beings would follow, and that within certain Muslim areas we could have some a modicum of Islamic authority, like the Muslim ground Christians. I'd love that. I say, fine, I'll take that. That's excellent. I often say that the concept of being that is called a dhimmi, or a citizen under contract. And you know what? I say, please treat me as a dhimmi. I'm totally happy for that. That would be the best thing ever. Unfortunately, in this state, I'm not treated as a dhimmi, which carries a negative with it, that I have to now conform to the prevailing system. And that's the problem. I don't want to conform. You say, why is it that you think that if you treat someone differently, you're being negatively discriminatory? Ever heard of positive discrimination? In fact, liberals have recourse to positive discrimination when it suits them as well. Also, it's like, in this world, there are people that have different absolutes or objective values. And that's fine. I mean, obviously, amongst the Abrahamic faiths, there's actually more in common than we actually have difference. But why not live in a world of a plurality of people believing in absolutes, and then work out a way of which we can negotiate with each other to live side by side? And I see no problem with this. That's the alternative. There's your alternative. Today, we're not here. I wasn't here to discuss the alternative so much. Just discuss the concept of secularism itself. But there is an alternative. It has been tried historically. There's an upcoming debate which they will discuss that much more in detail in this discussion. And I think we can find out a bit more about how to live in a truly multicultural system whereby difference is accepted, not accepted via you having to conform under a general rubric. And lastly, I think just to finalise, I don't know how much minutes I've got left, but basically 2 minutes. Basically, I set out today to show that secularism is irrational. His final conclusion is that, well, you know what, it might not make sense, and there's maybe no proof for it, and it's just self-evident. If you just take it self-evident and try it out, maybe it'll give some benefit to what's happening in the current world today, possibly, but it's better than all the rest. Well, then then that is, even if that is true, even humouring that being true, it still has shown that the secularism is still irrational. I could say that in the time of Jesus, Christianity was, it might not be rational, or maybe let's say after Jesus, I'll argue, it might have been rational, but it was better than all the other systems, and we should have tried that. You know what I'm saying? Or we could have tried, communism was good for pre-Soviet Russia. Tsarist Russia, we should have tried that. And if you said that, we live in a world where values and morals are subjective, let's embrace that fact, let's embrace subjective values. That's all great. But I know this argument's been used again and again and again, but in Nazi Germany, what was the common subjective values? It was a perception of being what is a German, which became so, touted and advocated in such a supremacist fashion that Jews were viewed as not even being human beings. They can't be in the same race as the Aryans. And not in a scientific way, but maybe as a kind of lesser subspecies, according to this kind of extreme social Darwinism that the Nazis were believing in. That was their social. That was the social, morals and values that they had, the subjective values they had at that time. Who's to say that's wrong?
Me.
And that's great, but unfortunately, because you're not infinite or absolute, I can't take your word for that.
You have to take the word of a non-infinite, non-absolute over the fact that there is no infinite and absolute. That's the choice.
Anyhow, and I think just to finally round off, I think Norman over there brought the point about if God exists, does that mean just because he exists, how should I still follow his, what he tells me? Well, it doesn't follow. He'd argue that I still have the same problem. That's not the case, because as human beings, we can appreciate that the concept of God possessing us, ownership. The ownership concept. That if someone owns you, they have a right over this, what they own. So we believe in our theology that God owns us. We are his property, and hence it makes rational sense to follow that. And at the same time, if that doesn't move or motivate you, there's also the reward and punishment concept, which is behind almost all law systems. Every single law, in the most fundamental discussion with philosophy of why you should do something, why you should follow the law theory, command theory, it is because of the threat of punishment and reward. It's in basic philosophy. So why is it that it's okay for that in philosophical discussions, but not when it comes to God's laws? Oh no, that's something different. No, that's just wrong. Or why should we follow that? No, I think you should look at the philosophy of command theory and why we should follow commands, and you have the exact same answer as the answer that Atheists would give you as to why we obey God. And all I'm arguing today is that we let us set up the basis for our society, for human organization, on a cohesive, cogent, and rational viewpoint, not something that we're just told to believe as a dogma and implement, and it doesn't solve even the problems it promised it would solve, and instead create even new problems that we never heard of before. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Abdullah. Thank you for everyone here tonight.